Vidarbha Literary Festival. It is our utmost pleasure to have all of you here with us in good spirits and especially in good health. As all of you may or may not know, this festival goes back, way back to 2020, just before the pandemic hit, where we had the biggest celebration of literature in our very first edition, kicking off the concept of non-fiction in action. Today, we are here with our very new theme, that is non-fiction for inclusion. So action for inclusion, right? In today's time and age, I think this session is relevant for almost everyone. I remember exiting out of my family group, being forwarded n number of texts about something, either fact or fiction, I'm still wondering, right? In fact over fiction, truth over disaster, we are the most peculiar of all times, where one share can lead to thousands of shares in seconds, and while that can be a boon for many, it is also quite a catastrophe. The sheer volume of untrustworthy information out there often overwhelms even the most earnest seekers among us. With access to vast amounts of knowledge just a click away, it seems increasingly difficult to distinguish verifiable information from fake news and made-up history. This book talks about many such common pieces of historical misinformation and debunked them with logic, reason, and irrefutable research done by our author. So let me introduce, to begin with the session, our moderator of today, Mr. Akshay Zadgaonkar, who is an entrepreneur, software developer, who works in the field of AI and computer vision and is a co-founder of Babyverse. His hobbies are reading, running, and programming in no particular order. It also gives me a great pleasure to introduce our author for today, Mr. Amit Schandillia, a language enthusiast and history communicator with a background in computers and finance. Amit Schandillia has a long relationship with history and has produced hundreds of popular Twitter threads on the subject. Of particular interest to him is making history accessible to laypersons by breaking down stories into thrilling, enjoyable reads. Amit also authors India Uncharted, an audio series on Indian history with Storytel. I welcome both of you to VLF. I am your anchor for today, Rujita Joshi, and I request our moderator to please escort our author on the day.
Good afternoon to everybody. And I'm so thankful that in spite of being lunchtime, you guys are here. So before we start, since I've mentioned lunchtime, one question for all of you. Who invented biryani? Parsis. Okay, so we are about to find out, because these are interesting such questions in the book that Amit has written. So Amit, it was really a unique experience to read your book. There are books that talk about history. There are books that talk about facts. There are books that talk about historical facts focused on one topic. But Amit, you have written a kind of truth dictionary about 30 questions that often get forwarded on WhatsApp. So what motivated you to write such a unique concept?
First of all, thank you for having me. This is my first stint at LitFest. So thank you all of you for attending the session. I'll give you a better question. Why should anyone talk about history in this day and age where everything has already been done to death? Like what do I bring to the table that has already not been read over and read over and over and over again since childhood? So instead of my journey, I'll tell you what misinformation in history does. Misinformation is the theme of the times we live in. There is misinformation in history, there is misinformation in politics, there is misinformation in science. We can only sense it today because the volume has gone through the roof. But this has always been the case with us. Like, the world has never been unaware of misinformation. The only difference is in scale. Now, the difference between history misinformation and scientific misinformation is that scientific misinformation is very easy to dissect, break down, and reason with. Like, somebody tells you XYZ herbal medicine can cure cancer. You can read a couple of research papers and figure out that this is false. And even if you don't recognize it, even if you fail to recognize the truth, you fall for it. You take some medication which is not good for you, which does not cure whatever you have, and at the worst, you die, you end up in the hospital. Whatever happens, happens to you. With history, the problem is it doesn't affect you in isolation. What happened thousands and thousands of years ago is still shaping our politics to this day. And that's the reason why history becomes such a potent weapon in the wrong hands and in the right hands, depending on which side you bat for. I'll come to biryani, but why biryani happens to be one of the topics in my book is because it just gives you an idea of the sheer scale of polarization that we have. We are fighting over food. And no, I'm not talking about beef ban and cow worship. No, forget that. That's religion, right? But there are fights over who owns biryani. So that's where we stand today.
The one who orders.
See? But if only social media were that casual about these kind of subjects. But things are not. I mean, blood is shed over the most trivial of issues. We might laugh it off, but tomorrow somebody gets killed over something very stupid. So, of course, nobody has been killed over biryani, I believe. Okay, somebody was sued over biryani, but that was a different case altogether. But who owns biryani did trigger a very heated exchange on Twitter that ran for almost a week, and people were trolled out of platform. People were literally trolled away from the platform. This is the extent to which things are polarized. Now, the story of biryani is, of course, very complicated, and again, that's another illustration of why things are not black and white. We have our Hindi scriptures which talk about mixing food and mixing rice and meat. We have genetic studies that say rice originated in China in the Yellow River Valley. Then we have historical accounts which give out recipes from the Mughal kitchen, recipes of the so-called most authentic biryani, the first biryani ever. Then we have etymological records that claim biryani came from birinj, which happens to be Sanskrit for rice. Then we have yet another story, an angle that nobody touches on Twitter because that's not part of the common discourse. That as far back as 300 BC, third, 4th century BC, when Alexander came to the Oxus Basin, north of Afghanistan, he found marketplaces selling a mix of rice and meat, and they called it some etymological variation of pilau. And that dish is something which you get all over Central Asia, as far as Europe, Spain, Mediterranean, and of course in India you have pulao. So pulao and biryani, that's another subject of polarization. People think pulao is Hindu and biryani. I mean, yeah, I'm not kidding. Biryani is Muslim, pulao is Hindu. It's not. There is no religion of food because biryani and pulao, though both happen to be the same, they share a common history. I cannot say etymological history, but a common history. The recipes have been shared and perfected over centuries, over at least 1,000 years before we had something that looks like what we have today. So that's the story of biryani, and biryani is a very trivial subject. End of the day, it's food. But if a trivial subject can be fought over with such high-octane aggression, you can imagine what more serious subjects like, things like Maharana Pratap, the Mughals, the Aryans. I mean, those are topics of serious concern. They have consequences. People die and kill over those subjects. So that's where my concern for history comes in. History does not affect one individual. History does not affect one group of individuals. History does not affect one moment in time or space. It affects, you never know what happened 1,000 years ago could end up having some consequences 2,000 years down the line from today. And in a very unexpected manner. So that is one reason why history is a highly, highly, highly underrated area of misinformation. I call it pseudo-history. Pseudo-history is being manufactured at an industrial scale. And this is not just a question of today. It has been happening since way before we were born.
Talking about industrial scale, so uh, WhatsApp has, so when it comes to, Rujita mentioned that, we had to leave our family groups. There is a lot of debate going on about various historical issues. So, in your book, you had mentioned more about history, specifically about Indian history. Do you think we as Indians are going through an identity crisis wherein we are manufacturing something that, helps us identify with what we believe in?
Well, we have always had this identity crisis. It's only now that the question has become more pronounced because of the kind of politics we are dealing with today, right? And more than politics, it's about the speed of transmission of information. The politics is a consequence and not the progenitor of what's happening today, right? So we often take everything as a result of polarized politics. No, polarization is a result of how fast the information moves and with what carefree abandon. Now, you can, basically history has been memified, if I might use the word. You don't have to put out any kind of research, you don't have to put out any kind of supporting reason. I might know that you're wrong, but I will still support you if the take you offer jives with my take, my outlook on the current geopolitics. You say something bad about Muslims, and let's say I hate Muslims, then even if you say something that's not true, and I know it to be incorrect, categorically incorrect, I will still help you. I'll become your bullhorn. Why? Because that's how the politics has shaped us. It has turned us into these ideological zombies who are just programmed to transmit information, and transmitting information has been eased out to such an extent that I don't need to make any effort. I don't have to pay for an SMS. I don't have to go to a cyber cafe to transmit an email, chain mail. Remember those chain mails back in the day?
Definitely.
Early 2000s. I don't have to sit at a cyber cafe. Data was not that cheap. Definitely no home internet, at least not for the middle class. Today, everything's on your fingertips. I mean, I don't need to elaborate on that. So, because of this speed, the scale, the visibility has increased. But this misinformation, make no mistake, has always been with us since ever before. Think of times as a pendulum. The pendulum swings. It swings left, it swings right, and it keeps going. Like earlier there was misinformation in some other area. Today misinformation happens in some totally different area. And in a way you can say it's being overcompensated, right? You must have heard of, if you are into history and you know how social media treats history, you must have heard of terms like the leftists have hijacked the academia, right? So now we might dismiss it, we might accept it as gospel truth, but truth is always fuzzy, right? We have to recognize that the advent of technology, the ease of technology has democratized information. And with democratization, what has vanished is accountability. I have access to all the information in the world, you have access to all the information in the world. And neither you are accountable for what you do with that information, nor am I. So who holds us responsible?
That's a very valid point. So coming to accountability, right? So social media has been a force of good. It has resulted in Arab Spring, wherein a lot of tyrants were brought down due to social media. At the same time, there were Brexit, US elections, where social media was used to sow divisions. So where does the accountability lie? Do you think social media should be regulated, or it should be allowed to self-regulate? Or at least, what do you think is an accountability term for social media? What does accountability look like for social media in terms of misinformation?
So I just spoke about a pendulum, right? The pendulum swings. So today you are being demonized, tomorrow somebody else will be demonized. I mean, you will demonize someone else because you have suffered a lot. Today you are suffering a lot of misinformation is demonizing you. So tomorrow when you have power, you demonize the other side which did what you want to do today. And now the pendulum swings on the other end. Then when the tables turn, it'll again swing back. Now how does the pendulum work? Have you ever noticed it? The swing decreases with every turn. And eventually after say 10, 15, 20, whatever number of turns, swings, a fatigue sets in. Now, in political, historical terms, in this language, we can say an ideological fatigue will set in. It does set in, always. It always happens. Now, the perils of regulating social media, basically when you say you want to regulate social media, you are saying you want to regulate the flow of information. Social media is just a vector. So when you want to control the flow of information, you have to be very careful of who wields that power. And to what extent can you always be sure of the intent of that individual or entity that wields that power? Now, yes, it worked out in the case of Arab Spring, but then did it? That's a different discourse altogether. What did Arab Spring give you? Did it bring democracy to the Arab world? Or did it give rise to ISIS? I mean, or Muslim Brotherhood. So, information can be used, abused, misused in more than two different ways. There is no binary. So, even if you take Arab Spring as a good example of how information can be used as power against a tyrant, how can you be sure that your democratization of information, your idea, will result in an Arab Spring or a Brexit, right? Or an India? So I would, my take, it's a very difficult question. My take is you have to let the ideological fatigue set in. It'll take its own sacrifices. I know that's a very harsh thing to say, and it'll take its own due course. That time could be within our generation, within 2 generations, within the next 3-4 election cycles. I don't know. I mean, nobody can predict, right? Or it could be sometimes like Lenin said. I don't know how many of you have heard this line. Sometimes nothing happens for years, and then years happen in a week. So you never know when something very drastic might happen. But then the point I'm trying to make is, in a nutshell, there is an absolute peril in trying to control the flow of information. You cannot, because you would never know who that control lies with.
So then this brings the another side of accountability. Then the onus definitely lies with us individuals who are consuming the information. But then something personal experience of mine, we are all aware that when COVID struck, COVID lab leak theory was considered as a fringe theory. It was considered to be a conspiracy theory. But then, 2 years down the line, it is considered as a mainstream theory. So now, since social media, again, I agree with you that, it's very dangerous. We don't know who is controlling the social media. Then the onus lies on us. But then how do we, with your experience, since you have been dissecting historical questions, so how do we maintain the hygiene? How do we maintain the sanity of whatever information we consume? Because we are very careful about what we eat. We don't eat something that is not hygienic. But when it comes to information, right, we have no option other than listening and consuming it or reading it. So for us, for our children, what kind of methods do we adopt to maintain that information hygiene?
So there are actually 2 questions here. Okay. So first is, when you talk about COVID being a COVID lab leak theory being a fringe idea at first and now becoming more mainstream. And by the way, I was also one of those who took it as a fringe theory, and then later I changed my opinion. Now, a very simple answer is no, you don't have to. You don't have to be perfect. And you cannot be. I mean, you can try much as you want, you cannot be. And this, pursuit of perfection, I have to have the absolute truth, and as soon as possible, sabse tez, like the news channels. That's where you end up messing things even further, because then there is no, where do you draw the line? You end up falling for every conspiracy theory. I mean, this ended up being a fringe theory. But are you that certain that the next time you hear something uncanny, it's also going to be a fringe theory? I mean, also going to be what looks like a fringe theory, but actually truth. You can't predict that, right? So, treat history as science. No, not in terms of the damage it can do. I have already elaborated on how history is far more damaging than science when it comes to misinformation. But treat history with the same rigor as you would treat science. which means science is an evolving discipline. You don't know everything right off the bat. For the longest time, we didn't know that the sun rose, I mean, the sun didn't move from east to west. It's us who moved from, in the other direction. We didn't know that. Then we just had a geocentric world. We had the earth at the center and the sun moved around us and we did just fine, right? The world just went on. Yes, we did martyr a few radical thinkers, but end of the day, we didn't have the information that we could work on beyond this. When we had new information, we expanded our horizon and we had new ideas. We didn't know that man could ever land on the moon. Forget about whether we knew about moon landing or not. Even 30, 40 years after moon landing, even today, I mean, I'll give you a very kind of embarrassing anecdote. Back in 2009, 10, when there was a Dan Brown wave, right? A lot of Dan Brown novels, I mean, 4 novels that came out. 2 of them, basically, Da Vinci Code and what's the other one? Angels and Demons, right? So these 2 are wildly popular. And that was the first of its kind. Then that triggered a phase of a kind of fiction that has a genre of its own. I mean, that kind of fiction was never done before, at least not on a scale like this. So what happened is, you couldn't tell whether there was an Illuminati or not, whether Vatican does conspire to kill people to spread, to have a one world order or not. And it's during that phase that a lot of other fringe theories gained ground, and with very convincing evidences, like, not evidences exactly, but very convincing backup. Like, we never landed on the moon. I think there was a documentary called The Dark Side of the Moon. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. So there was a documentary which absolutely fantastically convinced you that everything was a setup. Stanley Kubrick was in on it. Okay, then there was yet another documentary by this guy, Michael Moore, that 9/11 was an inside job. Right? The term mockumentary came out for the first time at those days. That even Kissinger and George Bush, and you talk about deepfakes today, I mean, those were deepfakes, right? You had George Bush talking about his relationship with Bin Laden and talking about how he is planning to strike the Twin Towers. So I got taken in. Many of us did. We absolutely fell for it. It took us years, at least I think until 2011. The window lasted until 2011 when I truly believed that man never landed on the moon. That 6 million Jews did not die. That was an exaggerated number in the Holocaust. That 9/11 was an inside job. That everything is a conspiracy and XYZ is a lizard man. All those kind of wacky theories. Sense prevailed afterwards as technology improved. Because see, when technology goes rogue, the solution also comes from technology, right? So with technology, we learned that these things can be faked, these things can be staged, and there is evidence of NASA has published an evidence of how man landed on the moon. So we learned, we got access to new facts, and we changed our mind. There is no shame in that. There is no harm in that. Fine, for a while, I did believe in the lab leak theory being fringe. How long? Just 2 years? Not even 2 years, I believe. For 1 year. After 1 year, I believe almost everyone was convinced that it was not a fringe theory. So 1 year of misinformation is better than perpetually falling for every fringe theory by default. Fringe theory should never be a default setting. It should always be whatever information I have, whatever pieces of evidence I have at my disposal. My opinion should be worked on that. When information changes, my opinion should change. It doesn't make me a bigot. It just makes me, a human who can change his opinion based on whatever is available.
So then misinformation we were talking about. So these are crowd-funded misinformation.
Okay.
Yeah.
One sec. Yeah. Let me complete the answer. So that was the first part of the question that I answered. Why, what happened with the fringe theory versus this. Now the second part of the question is how how to identify misinformation. Of course, I'm not saying you fall for every piece of misinformation just because you don't have any more information available at your disposal. No, there are things you can do. For example, there are red flags. Anything that comes as a meme is a lie. Period. I mean, there's no harm, there's no shame in saying, like, even if I say sun rises in the east, I don't have to put it in a meme and send it to you. If I'm sending it to you in a meme, if I'm asking you to forward it to 10 different people, if I'm appealing to your emotion, why would I need to appeal to your emotion? Let's say Aurangzeb was a tyrant, he killed a lot of Hindus. Let's say Aurangzeb killed 40 million Hindus. I know, terrible number, not true. But even if it did, why would I need to, if I say that with a rejoinder that forward this to XYZ number of people, and if you're a Hindu, wake up, and if I make you angry with that piece of information, then I'm not giving you information. You can rest assured, because then I have a motivation, and anything that comes with motivation cannot be true. Even if it's true, it cannot be nuanced. And history is more about nuance than about truth, because history is like in science, everything is black and white. Until you have new evidence, everything is black and white. History is never black and white. History is only an approximation at best. Sitting here in this hall today, or even at an archaeological site, you cannot tell with certainty, with absolute certainty, what the Aryans ate and what the Aryans spoke. Even today, we don't know what language the Indus Valley guys spoke. We have managed to decipher the Egyptian language to an extent, but we can never put our foot down and say we know exactly how they pronounce XYZ words and what they worship. Yes, we have a fair idea, and it can be an approximation, infinitely close to what the reality might have been, but only close. It can never be the reality because we don't have any access beyond a certain point.
So, an appeal to emotion brings me to an interesting topic. So when Patanjali was attacked, it was all about nationalism, desh ki mitti se bana hua product. When with the recent the Adani affair that is going on, so Hindenburg group sent list of 88 questions, and the appeal to emotion is there again. So it's like it's an attack on India as a nation. So it seems that nationalism has always been one of the convenient garbs under which we hide misinformation. Is it an exclusively Indian phenomenon?
By the way, good you bring up nationalism. Do you remember who said this famous line? I guess many of you must have guessed what line I'm going to talk about. Nationalism being the last refuge of the scoundrel. That line did not come from India. That was Bertrand Russell, right? Oh. So, what I'm trying to say is nationalism has been a universal trait and a universal weapon of mass destruction. There's a reason why nationalism is hyphenated with, seen as separately from patriotism. They are not synonyms. So the moment you define your emotions with respect to someone being inferior to you, right? If that's the motivation behind your opinions or ideology, it can never have anything constructive to offer, right? So now we have seen that in the case of World War II. And no, I'm not just talking about Hitler and Nazi. I mean, those are very low-hanging fruits. Mussolini, Hitler. What about Stalin? Stalin did not call his party nationalist. He called his party communist, socialist, and whatnot. I mean, by the way, Hitler also called his party socialist. Socialism is a very catch-all term for every kind of ideology. But same way, the catch-all ideology for every kind of evil when it comes to politics is nationalism. So this feeling that, we are one sounds very good. Fascism, we are one. The very idea of fascism is when you have a number of sticks tied up together. That symbol goes back to the Roman times. The sticks tied up together, nobody can break it. One single stick is very weak, you can crack it open. But a bundle of sticks, that's fascia, the Italian term. So we are one sounds like a very positive emotion, but behind that positivity is there is somebody who doesn't belong to this one. And that somebody has to be if not eliminated, at least alienated. It can never be inclusive, and what's not inclusive can never be human. And what are you if you're not human?
So very well put. But then, when it comes to inclusivity, inclusivity has basically enabled a country, a diverse country like India, to keep its temper in check, to make it an aspirational value of being an Indian. You know, India is a country that is all inclusive. But misinformation, do you think it is now being institutionalized?
Oh, absolutely. But then again, you might not like the answer, but it's a boring answer, but institutionalization of pseudo history, as I would say, is not a novelty of our time. Like I said in the beginning, only the scale has changed. Back in the day, it did not appear to be misinformation because it came directly from the academia, right? Back in the day, but again, the intent matters. There were parts of our history, there were parts of our story that were elided over. But to what end? That was in the interest of peace, harmony. You know, we were fresh out of a communal violence. I mean, the largest communal violence the world had ever seen during the partition. We were fresh out of that. So I really can't get into the mindset, get into the head of, our founding fathers and speak for them. But it's not very difficult to understand where they might have been coming from. Now, they might have had some designs of their own. I wouldn't deny that. But I'm just saying that they had a reason to, like, for their times, skip over certain parts, certain difficult aspects of our history. So that happened. We did not identify it because information was not democratic back then. Our access to history was our textbooks, research papers, our universities, all of which were behind, the word is walled garden, if you recognize that term. Now with internet, a lot has changed. This pulling down of the wall has meant every Tom, Dick and Harry, okay, that sounds like a very negative term, every individual, every clear thinking or not clearly thinking Indian has access to all the information at disposal. Information that is down to us, information that was kept away from us. So what happens is when a majoritarian, now India has been a majoritarian country because you have a democratic imbalance here. 80% Hindu, 20% Muslim, roughly speaking, like give or take 1 or 2%. So when there is a democratic imbalance like this, there's bound to be friction, there's bound to be resentment that, okay, we are the 80% majority and our own persecution has been kept away from our history books. Now we know the truth. So we have to make up for all the lost time and all the misinformation, all the information that's been given. Now what happens is, in this process, let's call it compensation. Now it's never compensation, it's always overcompensation, right? It was kept away from us in the larger discourse that Aurangzeb was a tyrant. Because it doesn't make much of a difference. Like, why talk about Aurangzeb? Okay, fine, they had their own reasons. Now today, oh, you talked about Aurangzeb being a good guy. Now I know he was a tyrant. Forget Aurangzeb, every Mughal was a tyrant, even Akbar was a tyrant. Deal with it. Not just every Mughal was a tyrant, every Muslim is a tyrant, has a tyrannical tendency because they subscribe to the Mughal school of thought. Whatever that Mughal school of thought is, only they know. Now the point I'm trying to make is, there is always going to be overcompensation. And this overcompensation, by the way, is not unique to India. It happens everywhere. There is always that sense of national pride, after Weimar Republic, after the...
Yeah, I'm sorry, we just have last 5 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. I'm sorry. This is the testament to the conversation where I hope you enjoyed. Yeah. No. But last question, which I want to push in before we go to the audience. So you have one question? Yeah. So I am a practicing AI professional, so of course I'm going to bring AI in the conversation. So what are the challenges for future historians, historical analysis people? Because now, for folks who don't have context, how many of you have tried Chat GPT? Yeah. So I think most of you know. So it can generate human-like conversations with an individual who is interacting with it. What role do you think is going to AI is going to play in this battle of misinformation as the time goes by?
AI is already beginning to play a role, not in just history, in many other domains. AI has started its thing. And it's very easy, okay, it's not very easy, but it's possible to still continue shifting the wheat from the chaff, as we say.
The volume bogs down
Because no,
AI can generate.
No, it's not about volume. What happens is you always have to focus on how the information is being served. Does it appeal to your, this is the only question that judges everything. Does it appeal to your emotions? Does it make you angry? Does it give you a sense of pride in something that you haven't achieved in your own personal capacity? If it does, then it's misinformation, it's motivated. Even if it's the truth, it's not nuanced. It has been twisted, and that by the way is far more dangerous than false. I mean, if I tell you Taj Mahal was a Hindu temple, you laugh it off because it's an obvious falsehood. It's very easy to dismiss. It's not dangerous. But if I tell you Akbar did something XYZ, it's not very easy to dismiss. I mean, there are things which you cannot dismiss right off the bat. Those are the real viruses you need to identify. Which again, the question is, does it appeal to your emotions?
Awesome. So I think we can move to audience questions.
Hello, Amit. Supant. Do you think eventually, say 5 years, 10 years down the line, a time will come when we will have what is some kind of an information glut, and all this will plateau out and eventually die a natural death, the spread of disinformation? And how important are fact-checking sites?
Fact-checking sites are always going to be, I mean, more relevant today than ever before, and their relevance will only rise with time. Now, and I'm not talking about fact-checking sites which serve a certain side. Like, you know, there are fact-checking sites that check, that counter right-wing propaganda. There are fact-checking sites that counter left-wing propaganda. There are all kinds of fact-checking. I'm not talking about any one side. I'm saying every kind of fact-checking site. Their relevance is going to grow only stronger with time. And yes, information rut is going to happen. And this, again, circles back to what I said about the pendulum coming back to an ideological fatigue. That fatigue will set in. I mean, it's all a cycle. There is a left-wing cycle, there is a right-wing cycle, and then there is a period of relative peace, history. I mean, what we are seeing today is only the past 10 years or 8 or 10 years of nuisance, if we call it. But India's history is thousands of years, at least 2,000 or 3,000 years, if not longer, recorded history. So let's not lose hope in how information is going to shape our future. It will all be good in the long run.
Hello, Amit.
Hi.
I'm Pratik, and I want to ask, it is easier to leave a WhatsApp group than to घर में अपोज नहीं कर सकते आपके फादर अगर बोल रहे हैं तो आप वहाँ से तो उठ के नहीं जा सकते एंड इट कैन मेक एन लॉट ऑफ इश्यूज एंड ऑल द डैमेज आफ्टर बिकमिंग द पेंडुलम बिकम स्टील पेंडुलम तो स्टील हो जाएगा बट तब तक जो डैमेज है वो क्रिएट हो जाएगा तो इसे किस तरह से बचाया जा सकता है
Not my domain. I mean, all I can say is, look, that's up to the individual because it's a very subjective thing. You have a certain equation with your family, you have a certain equation with the society you live in, the immediate society. And remember, you always respond to your immediate circumstances and incentives. So there can never be a one pill suits all. You know, I cannot give you a pill that this will work for everyone. No, it will not. And yes, I said sometime back, I believe, that this will take its toll. This will have a body count. I'm sorry, this doesn't sound very positive, but it happened, right? The Black Death happened. The Great Plague happened. 1/3 of the world's population died. And then Renaissance came. So I'm not saying everyone should die, but there is a certain inevitability that we have to come to terms with. Hello? Okay, mine is working.
So there is a concept called as steel manning. आपके फादर के आर्ग्यूमेंट्स को जो है ना बहुत प्यार से उनके फेवर में गूगल सर्च करो एंड पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट डिसेक्ट करो. तो पहले उनके ओपिनियंस को रीट्रेट करो और फिर पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट ये करो प्यार से, अपोजिशन से नहीं.
Hi Amit, I'm Sumit. So there's a friend of mine, and he has become like the kind of person you said once you had become related to misinformation, right? And it's not just politics. Like for everything to him is conspiracy. Every single thing, like everything I talk to him about is conspiracy. He can point me, show me videos, this and that. So, and this is a very dear friend of mine back from college. So I wanted to know, how did that change happen with you, or like did anybody push you, like did tell you something? How did you, change into this direction?
I'll tell you from my experience, you can never change it, never. Right? You say he's a, ironically, paradoxically rather, change can never come from someone you know. So if I have a certain conception, if I believe in something, and that too, almost like religion, if you happen to be related to me, you're the last person who can change my mind on that, right? Because you're not a subject, you're not an objective voice in my head. I don't see you as objective. I see, अरे यार ये तो ये ऐसे ही बोलता है, ये मुझे oppose करता है चीज़ में, so he is wrong, he is clearly wrong. It has to be one's own personal journey. It was my journey. I had to go through books, I had to go through debates. I had not debates like involving me, watching debates. Then YouTube opened a whole new world, right? So YouTube, videos, documentaries, books. Reading cannot be, doesn't have an alternative. You have to read. Like, of course, there are videos and documentaries, but reading doesn't have a substitute. And like I said, it has to be one's own journey. Your friend, if he has to change his mind, he will change, but you cannot do it. It has to be his own thing.
Ma'am, I think you had questions.
Yeah, pardon my ignorance because I'm not on the net. I mean, I'm just out of it, completely out of it. I'm in books. This morning I got a little booklet which says that Nagpur is known as Orange City because oranges were brought to the city by Bhosle King of Nagpur. Now this is on the net and there is no book, no pamphlet mentioning this. But this story is going around everywhere. Nagpur got its name Orange City because the JCs formed a new group and they were wondering what name to give it, so they called it Orange City. But Orange City is not, it's not Orange City because the Bhosle is brought. Now how do you counteract this? Often I find on the internet information is wrong, incorrect, and it's spreading like wildfire because books on Nagpur are not available.
So somebody has to write one then.
No, there has to be some control somewhere.
You can't. I mean,
I don't know then how do you accept that? You
Ma'am,
can't
sorry to
accept it
interrupt
as
you,
true.
but I request you to please keep the questions crisp.
So, no, I get the question. The problem is you cannot. It's a beast of its own with a mind of its own. Information is a living thing. Think of it this way. Information is a living. You can't change it. You can only influence it to an extent. That too to an extent. Now, the only way to influence information is by generating more information, right? The right kind of information. Now, if you're saying there are not enough books on Nagpur, then somebody has to write one. I'm pretty sure, if you know that this is how Nagpur got its name, then there must be a source of your information, right? You must have known it from someplace. Maybe that source deserves better exposure. Maybe somebody like you who knows that to be the truth, and somebody else who knows something else to be the truth, like, the Bhosles brought oranges to Nagpur. Maybe there has to be some kind of a debate, and that too, again, if either of you have an interest in resolving this issue, because not every issue one has a stake in, right? You might not have a stake in something is wrong, something is misinformation, but you might not have a stake in it. So it's all subjective.
So can we squeeze in one more question if possible? Yeah.
We can have two more.
Two more? Okay. So
Hello, Amit.
Courier ma'am, I'll use that time. We can So I'll just answer your question in short.
I'm so sorry for my long answers. I didn't realize.
So as a Nagpurian, there is a source wherein we can use publications to search. So there are reputed historical publications where academicians publish their papers. I think that you can use to find the information. Yeah. Question.
Two quick questions in
Two
the next
questions.
4 minutes.
Hello, Amit. I'm Imanshu. So you stated that nationalism is not inclusive. So can you suggest some ways where nationalism can be inclusive? Because as a youth, I am worried or it makes me anxious about the fact that nationalism and these concepts and other things, because they are too mind-boggling for us to, from a broader perspective to take in.
You're trying to push a square peg into a round hole. Heard of that proverb? Yeah. So nationalism by definition can never be inclusive. I'll tell you why. Nationalism comes from nation, and how do you define a nation? Like, okay, fine, you define nation as India. Not everyone does. To many, nation means Hindus. It's a Hindu nation, Qaum. In Urdu, we have a word Qaum. Now, if you take the word Qaum, it means every Muslim on the planet. That's a nation, Islamic nation. Not the political identity, ideological one. So nation is a very fuzzy term, right? You can be, Maharashtrian is a nation. The Maharashtrian people, that's a nation. Dalits, that's a nation. Everything is a nation. You can go as granular as you want, you break down molecules, go down to atom, say protons and neutrons and quarks and subquarks and whatnot. So there's no end to it. So how far, so you see what's happening here. The moment you start defining an emotion with the nationhood of an identity, then there are thousands and countless identities basically. So are you really uniting anything? Are you further dividing it, making it more granular? Patriotism, that's your word.
Very well put. So we have one last question.
Yeah.
Hi. So my basic question to you is that when you were writing your own manuscript, what were the feedbacks that you got from the alpha readers about this?
Not many feedbacks so far. So, it would be very unfair to elaborate on the positive feedback. But yeah, of course, there were a couple of feedback on nuance once again. I forget the positives. I'll talk about the areas of improvement that have been given. That yes, some have felt that the nuance is missing on certain subjects. Now again, history is a very, very, very fuzzy area. You can never please everyone. No, I'm not saying this with any sense of arrogance or, propriety. I'm just saying you cannot please everyone, because when you tell a story, and that too when you have to tell a story in, let's say, 3,000 or 2,000 words or 4,000 words, you are going to skip out on at least some bit of the nuance. And it's going to be unpleasant for someone or the other. And whenever there is something that's unpleasant, it will be flagged off as an area of improvement. So yes, it has been.
So one great thing about the fest is that our authors are available in the lawn area at their convenience. You can come and talk to them, get your book signed, buy the books from Crossword, etc., and also enjoy some amazing food in the lawn, right? Going forward, I think one of the most enlightening part for me personally was that, you should treat history with the same rigor as science. When we have new information, we expand our understanding of what history was, right? So I think that was one very enlightening for me myself, right? One of the forms of art that we are presenting here is in the form of the written word. Art can be in many forms. So we have from the field of painting, right, from Alag Angle community, a painter, Bhavika Kabra, who has painted a customized painting for our author to honor him and thank him for coming down to Nagpur. I request our moderator to kindly present her with the speech.